Welcome back, family. We have a lot going on in the world and, of course, a lot to update you on. And I will plan the update for a future time, probably in the next week or so, about the things going on with Creation Standard, how that all turned out, what a blessing it was, as well as what the future holds. And there's a lot to discuss, so I will save that for another discussion. But today, I want to talk about Revelation and worldly events, things that are happening right now that tie in to biblical history. And so it's important to know where we are, how we're supposed to live, and what we live on. But the most important lessons that we can learn are from simply going back and seeing what the Father's people have been through, the test, the deceptions, over and over again, as well as the instructions in Revelation that let us know exactly what we're up against, but it's written in a way that is not easy to understand, and I do not claim to fully understand it. So I want to put that out there. Don't be misled by me if I'm ever wrong by anything I'm saying or how I see things. There could be something totally different to the picture that I am missing. But I want to put out there what I am seeing, and it takes us back to Revelation 12, which seems to be paralleled in chapter 13. If you look at all the parallels, it's very, very interesting. But we see in verse 17 that the dragon was wroth with the woman, or angry with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which do two things. Here's what you got to look for: which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. This lets us know that the dragon was angry at a time that the Messiah had already been here, where people were testifying about him and keeping the commandments. And so we know that it's been within the last 2,000 years. And so this is going to take us on a journey back in time to where we can see specifically points in time where there was a lot of anger towards people who were what they call Judaizing. If you were keeping the commandments back in Rome, you were considered a Judaizer. You were outlawed from doing that. You could not rest on the Sabbath. And so they made changes to that. They changed appointed times, or they claim they did. They claim they have all sorts of authority. Rome did. And it was great authority. And the people who were following after the testimony of the Messiah had some dark things happening to them. And as I'm diving back into history and looking at what was going on to believers in the early days, the ones that were keeping the commandments and having the testimony, the two things that make the dragon angry, they were targeted with the intent to be entirely wiped out across the Roman Empire. They were making people comply with not only their traditional religious practices, but they were making rules that not only, outlawed the keeping of commandments like the Sabbath, but tried to force them to break other commandments, just like Daniel in Babylon. They were trying to get him to worship another god or bow down to a graven image. And right here in Rome, during the Diocletianic persecution, this was a few hundred years post resurrection, they were trying to get them to sacrifice to their false gods, the same ones that you and I grew up having to repeat their names out loud and sing them as if they are this laid out set of planets, in a solar system, and they're in a certain order from the sun. Everything's going around Helios in their model. That's why it's called heliocentric. And so we were forced to just say their names, but back then, people were forced to sacrifice to them or die. And it is a dark period in time. I'm not going to get into all the graphic details. You guys can look into that. But the person here wearing the corona, that's Diocletian. Lots of statues of this guy. These people wanted to be deified. He would actually paint himself gold and want people to call him Jupiter. So a lot of the things that we talk about today, names that we have that we hear all the time, names like Jupiter and all of that, they're names that are in our textbooks for a reason. They're names that the world wants us saying over and over. But I want to look at Revelation real quick just to give you some information that I believe ties into what we're seeing today with worldly events. This rise of Rome yet again, us having an American Pope, and all these things. But we go to Revelation 13, and it says, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And guess what? That's that beast right there. You've got this description, a description that sounds very familiar. So remember that description. Feet, what were they like? The feet of a bear, mouth of a lion. Okay. Please remember that because it's going to be key here later on. But the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. This is chapter 13. Remember in chapter 12, the dragon was angry with those that had the testimony of Jesus and kept the commandments. And now this same dragon is giving power and authority to another beast. This beast has multiple heads. There's lots of different interpretations of what that means, but he says here that he saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And so a beast that's getting power from this dragon that was angry with those keeping the commandments and the faith, and all the world wondered after the beast. But who are they worshiping? They worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast also, right here it says, saying, Who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. That's a 3.5 year period. When you go back to chapter 12, it talks about another 3.5 year period. So you have two 3.5 year periods, and I believe there's another one that's about that distance in time or length of time. And so you have something significant about 3.5 years. It's going to be happening. But there's about 3.5 years left in this term of the presidency. And it says here that he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And I want to clarify, I'm not talking about Trump saying these things. You know, there's a lot of powers going on, of course, with the new pope being one of them, who started out by praying to Mary. To me, that seems blasphemous. And so you have here, it says, it was given unto him to make war with the saints, the believers. So what we've seen happening in the past sounds like it's going to be happening again. And here's what else he's given power to do, to overcome them. And the power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And so if your name's not in that book of life, why is it not in there? Probably because you are worshiping the beast or the dragon. And so Revelation 13, a big deal. But just to give you a visual here, you have the dragon. I like to have things to where I can see what's going on, who made war with the remnant of her seed, now giving his power and great authority and his seat to this beast that has multiple heads, with one of them heads being wounded. And of course, those who don't have their name in the book of life saying, Let's worship the dragon and the beast. And so that's Revelation 13. Why is that significant? Why am I reading that now? Well, we go back to what this dragon was doing. We talked about them changing commandments. This was 363 and 364 AD, canon number 29, which was the 59th ruling of the Council of Laodicea by authority of the Pope, where he says that Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath. If you were angry at people keeping commandments, what would you do other than just wipe them out? You would make laws that prohibited them from keeping their commandments. Sounds kind of dragon-like to me. And in chapter 12, it talks about the dragon being red. What are the colors of Rome? Well, they're scarlet. They look red to me. And you have here, rather honoring the Lord's day, and if they can, resting then as Christians. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema or cut off from Christ. So you have that going on. You also have lots of things that look very familiar here. Here's Rome. Going back, if you can go back in time and walk around on their tiles, you would see some very familiar symbols. When you look at their older paintings, you can see these same symbols, almost as if that power of the dragon never fully went away, started making a comeback. Here is children in America from the 1890s to the 1940s pledging allegiance to the flag. And the term or phrase, one nation under God, wasn't even in the pledge back then. They were simply pledging to the flag and to the republic. Rome was founded as a republic. And that's important because the founding of Rome is something that I was only recently investigating with CreationStandard. We're looking back at a lot of these things. And I found out that Rome, remember those twins, Romulus and Remus, with Romulus being the founder of Rome, he killed his twin brother. I didn't realize that these twins and the legend of them was so dark in its origins because it's not just some tale of two regular twins. These twins were demigods, according to them. They were the children of the god of war known as Mars. Where is the world trying to bring us now? Back to Mars. Think about that. The father of the founder of Rome. We're trying to go back there. And you see all the time people like this, not just one shirt about getting your butt to Mars, we'll say that. Many different shirts, many different special occasions. They want us knowing where they want to take us. And no, it's not to some ball of gas in a vacuum. They want us to go to their false gods and to worship them. And so you see that going on in mainstream culture. And even recently, I don't know if you guys heard about this, they allegedly brought back some extinct species of wolf known as the dire wolves. They say that they brought them back and then they gave them names. There's three of them: Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, if I'm saying that right. Khaleesi, I don't know how you say it, but that'll be significant here in a little bit. You guys could probably correct me on the pronunciation. But Romulus and Remus were the ones that I saw their names of and started investigating this again. But the company that allegedly brought them back, which they didn't, if you understand biology, there's a way to clone things. They did not clone a dire wolf. They genetically modified a gray wolf to look like a dire wolf. And so the company behind this cloning process, they're going to try to bring back other pre-flood giants. We are in the days of Noah. They're woolly mammoths and whatnot. But the company is called Colossal, which is a reference to the extraordinary size of a particular statue, and it's derived from the Greek word kolossos, which meant gigantic statue, because it's from the Colossus of Rhodes, who itself was a large statue of the sun god Helios, and it was at the entrance of Rhodes. That's why, one of the reasons why, anyways, that the Statue of Liberty is called the New Colossus or the New Helios. And so, very, very dark things going on. But we look further into that narrative, the narrative about Romulus and Remus. It wasn't just Romulus who founded Rome, and that's the end of the story. These two were placed in a basket to save their lives because someone wanted to kill them. Sounds a lot like Egypt. When, remember Moses being placed in the ark, these twins were placed in a similar device, put in the waters, and guess what? They were rescued by a wolf. And this wolf raised them until a shepherd came and saved them. And so that's how Romulus and Remus got their start, according to their mythology. Now, why is that interesting to me? Well, if you've ever read the book of Enoch, which I know some of you guys can't stand Enoch, but it's a book that has really been a blessing to me and brought a lot of answers. The wolves in his parable in chapter 89, depending on which translation you look at, the wolves were representing Egypt. Remember, the wolf brought these two boys out of the water. Who brought Moses out of the water? Egypt. And so when you're seeing this parable here, this talks about the children of Israel and what happens to them. I'll let you guys read all of this. But essentially, I'll summarize it. You had 12 sheep representing Israel, and the asses represented the Ishmaelites. And so those asses brought the sheep to the wolves, or one of the sheep, I'm sorry, one of the sheep being Joseph, to the wolves because the 12 sheep had grown and they gave up one of their own. And so that is talking about Joseph. And it shows you how eventually all the 12 sheep got brought into Egypt with the wolves and began to prosper and grow. So it goes through that account. It even has the Red Sea crossing in all of this. So it's beautiful stuff. You guys can read that yourselves. You can take screenshots if you want. It's a really cool visual of the things that did happen. And so that reminded me of Romulus and Remus. Really, really cool parallel there. But then you have Khaleesi or Khaleesi. I don't know how you say it. It was from a show that I never watched, but the show itself has a woman who's friends with the dragon. Friends with the dragon, right? That's who they named that third pup after. A woman that's friend with the dragon and the founder of Rome and his twin brother. Of course, he murdered his twin brother. They had to have the whole Jacob and Esau, Cain and Abel aspect in there. The enemy likes to have their version of the story, mix it with biblical stuff, and have people just worshiping after that really cool story. And so that is how I see all that stuff tying together with modern times and bringing us back to Mars. The father of Romulus and Remus. I mean, just think about that. And here's people like Buzz with his Helios at the center, all these other planets just around the sun. Bring us back to Mars. Come on. There's a reason you're this famous. You're this supposedly legendary. You're a part of a secret society, the same one that 11 of the 12 moonwalkers were a part of. And you're wanting to go back there. And you're going and special ordering these shirts, many of them. It's for a reason. And so to get back to how this ties into things we're seeing today, we got to, of course, go back in time yet again, something we've talked about in the past, and it's the creation of our so-called capital, or the site where our capital sits there in Washington, D.C. This was back in the 1600s, not that long ago. The property that was going to become the capital on the Maryland property records was listed as Rome, and it was owned by a man named Francis Pope. We just had a Pope Francis pass away, and now we have a new Pope. What is his name? Most of you know him as Pope Leo. Well, Pope Leo has a real name, Robert Francis Prevost, another Pope Francis. And the name Francis wasn't even the original Pope's real name. His name was Bergoglio. His name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, and he was the first ever Jesuit Pope. Why is that a big deal? I'm telling you, there's just so much to cover in this. I don't know how I could break this down any differently, but it's a big deal that he was a Jesuit Pope because the Jesuits formed a pact with the Masons and created the Illuminati in 1776. Lots of cool coincidences here. And now we have our first ever Jesuit Pope, one half of the Illuminati, and Masonry being a big deal. And it's a big deal in DC. Great big deal. When I was there this summer, past summer, what did I see? I saw this large Washington Masonic National Memorial Building. This thing was huge. You can see it from many different places. I never got to walk up to it. We were pretty busy and we didn't have a whole lot of time there. But I found some pictures on the internet. You can see they have their giant Masonic compass thing here. And this memorial building, why would you use our tax dollars to make a Masonic memorial building for somebody? Well, they wanted to not just memorialize him, but also pay tribute to an ancient lighthouse in Rome. Imagine that. A lighthouse in Rome being the inspiration for this place. Lots of depictions of this in ancient carvings. You can find plenty of these, but it's a lighthouse showing people where Rome is. Hey, come here. Like, we can't make it any more obvious. Put out a beacon of light. We're literally reconstructing a lighthouse to pay tribute to the Masons. And so the Masons showing their stronghold in DC, but you also have the oldest church there called the Holy Trinity. It's a Jesuit church right there in Rome. And I pulled up a picture of it. And I mean, just look how funny right here. Got the rainbow flags. right there in the back seat. Just interesting. Celebrating Pride, I'm sure. This was probably taken in June, the month we're in right now, depending on when you're watching this. But I think that this stuff is starting to tie together and bringing back the old ways. We're going to see a rise in those old ways. And so, how does this stuff show us that what we're looking at today is significant? Well, let's just look at the name of the Pope, the new Pope. His first name was Robert, which means bright fame. His middle name is Francis, which means free man. It'd be funny if it meant like Freemason, but free man or French man, either one. But prevost, this is where it got interesting when I was looking into this several weeks ago. A person in charge or provost in English, it originally denoted a high ranking official, particularly in a military or civil context, but also in a religious context as head of a church or cathedral. The term evolved, it says, there's evolution, from Old French prevost, which itself came from Latin praepositus, meaning placed in charge, given the power to the beast. And so now we have our first ever American Roman Pope. I feel like this is significant. I could be wrong, but I feel like it is. And like many of you guys, I don't know anything about this Pope. I've never seen the guy before this. However, his history is dark in one aspect that really makes a lot of us angry because we know what it entails. But back in 2000, so 25 years ago, this guy allowed someone to reside at a place where there were children, and he was someone who was an offender. I will say that. Someone who had hurt children before, they allowed him to reside near them. And it says with a monitor, somebody monitoring him, as if they're going to pay somebody. I mean, how are you going to have somebody monitor a grown adult 24/7, you know? And so he allowed that to happen. That was on Wikipedia. I wasn't even looking for that and seeing, this stuff there. It was just information, that the people voted for this guy knowing that he was someone who made a decision, had some authority and enough authority to say, yeah, let him stay here. No big deal. He's already hurt children. Who cares? Let's put him around other children. He was at a school area, like that environment where you have children all over the place. Very disturbing things. But that's the type of person who is rising to power and going to the Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica, a place like this that just looks so grand and spectacular. Look at all these carvings and look at this monument right here. Kind of looks like Washington Monument, as if you're in DC here. But there's something dark about all of this. And I found that out when I was investigating Eratosthenes and saw that he used obelisks for his observations and that he worshiped Zeus and all these things. But obelisks, for those of you who don't know, graven images used for sun god worship, and they have been brought to many different parts of the world, shipped from Egypt. Egypt and Rome, same types of powers, just like Babylon. I mean, these things are everywhere for a reason. And where the one here becomes significant is when you do some digging and find out that the obelisk there was in the circus of Nero at a time when the dragon was angry with those having the faith and keeping the commandments. And it was in his circus, the circus of Nero, where so many believers were slaughtered, including, they say, Peter and Paul. And so they say it was moved from there to its current site. And I thought, how far did they move this thing? Let's see. Here's a map that I found showing you. Here's Nero Circus in red. Here's where it is today, right on the boundary line of where that circus was. And there's St. Peter's Basilica, where the Pope resides, according to mainstream sources. And so that obelisk right there at the center, a sun god worshiping object where many believers were slaughtered. Why would you want to have it as a decorative piece in the middle of your yard? That is not something our Father would want us to do. Kind of reminds me of the Roman Colosseum or a lot of the ball arenas that they have around the world. Football, basketball, they're always trying to keep us watching these things and entertained. And you wonder, how did it go from things like that to murdering people and witnessing it? well, I feel like we're going to be seeing pretty soon how they get us all to do that, as I believe these ways are going to make a comeback. And that's why we see certain things we do, and people go, well, it's not what you think. And it's not. It's not. It's almost never what you think it is. But things like this, when, this is taken out of context. There was pictures floating around of Elon doing this where he was clutching his chest and then waving his hand out, and people were saying he was doing the Hitler salute. And let's just say he was throwing his heart out there to the crowd in a weird way. But the salute, my son let me know, was actually a Roman salute. It wasn't a Nazi salute. That's why you saw it rise up before people were doing it in Germany. We looked at an image earlier of the Bellamy salute. It was going on around the world, that same type of salute in the 1890s, the 1930s, the 1940s. It was huge. And of course, Germany ruined it for everybody, and people stopped doing it because of that tainted image, but it's an image from Rome, and they received their inspiration for that salute from an image. And so they say, of course, online sources tell us this, that the inspiration was from a painting, a real famous painting. That's where the Roman salute or the Nazi salute came from. And so they're literally getting it from an image of Rome. How odd is that? Worshiping the image of the beast. Sounds familiar. Getting all of that, things like their symbol being plastered all over the place. Seems like Rome is being reborn many years ago and is now getting stronger, as if that authority is getting passed on. And so lots of different unique connections. We've talked about so many before. I don't want to cover all of them. But with Rome making its resurrection, what are we going to see according to Revelation? Where we're going to see a threat from above before Armageddon. They're preparing to make war against the Almighty. What better way to have us in fear and ready to make war as to tell us, hey, we're going to protect you from what's above. We're going to have a protective dome above you. And this dome is going to be so powerful, you don't have to worry about all these threats from above. It's going to take us a few years to get it in place. But hey, you're going to be protected from all those threats above you. Meanwhile, these kings of the earth, they're being deceived. I'm not saying that Trump knows that, hey, we're going to make war against God Almighty. The leaders of the earth are going to be deceived. That's what those unclean spirits are doing in these days. They are deceiving the kings of the earth. They've done it before, repeating old lies. And so there's a lot to think about with all the things going on. But I told you guys at the start to remember feet like a bear, mouth like a lion. Why is that significant? Well, when we go back to David, when he was about to fight Goliath, he says that he was looking after his father's sheep before he went to battle. And he's telling them his story of how he took out a lion and a bear. And I want you to listen to how this is worded. And I believe it's significant and has to do with the spirit of prophecy that he was given after he was anointed, because this is after he was anointed. He had the Holy Spirit guiding him when he fought Goliath. He wasn't doing it on his own. He wasn't just this brave man. The Holy Spirit knocks out fear so that you don't have it. And it says here that David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear. I don't know about you guys. That sounds plural. Lion and a bear. And took a lamb, singular, out of the flock. And I went out after him and smote him, those sound singular, and delivered it, singular, out of his mouth, which is also singular. And when he, again, this is singular, arose against me, I caught him by his beard. Which of these two creatures has a beard? Probably the one with the mouth of a lion, just like Revelation. And smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. That's 1 Samuel chapter 17. So it went back to plural at the end. And we see at the UN, statues popping up a few years ago. A beast, kind of like a leopard, feet of a bear, mouth of a lion type of deal. They're putting these things in our faces. the feet of a bear, very similar to the feet of a lion, but the claws are longer, not quite as hooked. But Revelation is significant. We've been given clues that this stuff was going to happen, as well as the back and forth where you have David and Goliath talking. And David is, imagine looking at someone just gigantic, covered in armor with a massive sword and shield and all these things. And here you are with a stick. And that giant says to you, am I a dog that thou comest at me with staves or sticks? That's what that word means, sticks. And it says here that the Philistine, he actually cursed David by his false gods. How helpless and pathetic was that? He thinks he's got some strength from these demons. But it says here that the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beast of the field. That's a pretty big threat. And you could imagine being this large giant of a man. You've probably seen that happen time and time again, and you thought, here it is about to happen again. But he's speaking blasphemy against the Most High. And David has witnessed that. And so David says, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. He didn't say, I'm going to do this on my own. He knew the Most High was going to be there with him. And I will smite thee and take thine head from thee. Oh, and yes, he did. That happened right after. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So powerful statements that we see coming to light, same type of language. And remember, it says here, the God of the armies of Israel is who he has defied. Well, when we look at Revelation 19, the armies which were in heaven followed him. Who were they following? They're following the one that John says he saw when the heavens had opened on a white horse. And the one that was on the white horse, he says, was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him. And those armies were wearing white fine linen. They were also upon horses. So after that, it says, out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I think you're starting to figure out who this is. And then further on it says, I saw an angel standing in the sun. And he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly, remember David was talking about those fowls of the air, so was Goliath. But it says, the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather yourself together unto the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of kings and the flesh of captains, just like they did after David slew Goliath. We're going to meet their fate, the ones that are blaspheming the Most High, just like you saw in Revelation when we started out. And so lots of things paralleled in the Word, and we're seeing so many things come back. You're going to see a resurrection of Roman ways. The dragon hasn't been that seemingly angry with people in recent times, but there's a reason people are starting to go back to not only having the testimony, but also keeping the commandments. That's what made the dragon angry, and he's given his authority over. So wouldn't you think, if they're in cahoots, it's the same powers, that they're going to try and do the same things again? And so just be ready. You guys need to be prepared for the spiritual warfare that's going to happen. Make sure you are doing what makes the dragon angry. That's keeping the commandments and having the testimony of Jesus. It's something that is going to bring great persecution, but it's also going to bring great joy. And that's why I believe we're told to endure to the end, time and time again, to be saved. What are we enduring? He knew what we were going to have to endure. And these things are coming back, I believe. So you're going to see some rapid changes. We've already seen rapid changes in the last several years with things, with just, technology in general, AI and all of that. But I'm telling you, it's going to ramp up. And real soon, I believe we're going to see those Roman ways coming back. Not trying to scare you guys. Remember, like David said, it wasn't him doing the battle. When the return happens, it's going to be a slaughter. They are trying to get us to prepare for threats from above. We've been talking about that in depth a lot lately, with them preparing us with these extraterrestrial threats and all of that. But they want us to make war against God Almighty. They deceived Pharaoh and his followers when the pillar of fire was literally right there. So just imagine what they can do now with all the technologies they have and those lying signs and wonders they're going to have. It's going to be interesting. Don't know exactly how all of it's going to unfold, but I do feel like the Roman ways and that dragon being angry play a part. And so you guys feel free to share any information you have or insights you have. I love seeing what you guys have to say. But I thank you guys for your patience. I've been longing to do a video and a hangout with you guys. We will be live tomorrow night, June 7th, with Mikey Jenny. And so if you're watching this later, I'm sorry if you missed it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification button so you don't miss our lives. They're not, set at any exact time. They're usually later in the evenings due to our schedules. But please make sure you hit that notification button. And if you want to support this ministry, we're going to be needing a lot of support with what we're doing with Creation Standard. And I will have someone joining me for a huge, huge announcement here pretty soon. You guys stay tuned for that in regards to Creation Standards. But that's all I wanted to share. It's a lot, it's all over the place. I just feel that we need to be really focusing on the words of our Father and His beloved Son that He sent to give us an example how to live so that we can continue making the dragon angry and doing the right things. And so that's it. I love you guys. The Father loves you, and we will see you next time.